Fantasy. It's a genre that pretty much grants a free for all to creativity in media. With anime, the majority of series could be considered as fantasy with how they bring viewers into another world. Whether it be from presenting a world where monsters exist or a grand fantasy adventure, there are so many types with a lot to pick from. One popular theme of fantasy these days is the isekai theme. Basically, it brings a character from a normal world to a fantasy world by summoning or otherwise, and it's just one of many popular choices for a modern fantasy series. There could be a series that has magical creatures running around, yet is also more focused on the slice of life and comedy genre. There could also be an isekai series that is more on adventure and drama than fantasy. Who doesn't love an amazing fantasy story? From serious tales like Lord of the Rings to lighter hearted romps like Onward, it's a genre that begs to be explored time and time again. Still, few forms of animation have told more fantasy stories than those shown in anime. With thousands of fantasy anime released available for viewing, it can be difficult for fans to decide which ones to watch. Covering action, slice of life, and comedy at practically every other genre imaginable, each anime season brings with it a few new fantasy shows. Let's get to them, eh? Number 1. Mushishi. Fantasy is such a loosely defined concept that expands to include hundreds upon hundreds of shows. However, generally speaking, fantasy anime tends to take place in unique worlds and have a decent amount of action. Mushishi opts for something different. Adding fantastical touches to a familiar world, Mushishi centers around Ginko, a guy who travels around Japan searching for mushi, magical creatures usually found in nature. Largely consisting of self-contained stories, Mushishi is a calming and beautiful show, a fantasy anime that blends the extraordinary with the mundane. Number 2. Hunter x Hunter. Highly regarded as one of the greatest action shonen anime ever, Hunter x Hunter starts out as a rather stereotypical entry in the genre before eventually revealing itself to be quite unique. In this universe, hunters exist to investigate the world's secrets and occasionally take on a dangerous foe. The loose definition of hunters grants the anime the freedom to play around with the structure of its arcs, including storylines that barely feature the protagonists, Gon and Killua. Featuring a fantastic power system and a strong roster of characters, Hunter x Hunter is a must-watch fantasy anime. Number 3. Attack on Titan. Launching in 2013 and set to complete its run in 2022, Attack on Titan has been arguably the most popular anime of the last decade. In its gripping opening episode, AOT establishes that humanity has been reduced to cowering behind huge walls designed to keep out titans, massive humanoid creatures with big appetites. After witnessing the death of his mother, Eren Yeager sets out to wipe the titans. That's just the first episode, and things get complicated from there. Attack on Titan has gone from strength to strength since its debut season. For anyone searching for a darker than average fantasy anime, this is the benchmark. Number 4. Full Metal Alchemist. On the surface, this seems more focused on the militaristic action aspect of the story, but the fantasy in this series comes from its amazing lore and deep character backstories. The alchemy factor is strong in the series, and it's what truly brings out the fantasy side of things. What's more, the general story involves a full-on magical fantasy history. The series begins with young brothers Edward and Alphonse Elric attempting a forbidden transmutation ritual in order to bring back their dead mother. This results in Edward losing an arm and a leg while his brother lost his body and now his soul resides in a suit of armor. By the time they're teens, they have become alchemists on a quest to retrieve what they have lost. But can they get it back? Well, you'll have to give it a watch to find out. Number 5. Fruits Basket. While this anime may not be the most fantasy-heavy series, it's still a fantasy piece to check out. It tells of Toru Honda, an orphan high school girl who, due to renovations at her relative's house, ends up living in a tent in the forest. One day she meets the Somas who own the land she is staying at. Following a landslide which destroyed her tent, Toru ends up living with the trio of Soma males. She soon discovers that the Somas hold a secret, and the secret involves the zodiac animals. If you're interested in a slice of life fantasy involving people turning to animals, this is the one to watch. You'll be hooked from episode 1. Number 6. Pokemon. For some anime fans, this entry may come as a surprise. However, for all that is, Pokemon should be considered a fantasy anime. The series brings out into a different world where fantastical creatures exist. What's more, people live with and travel and train these creatures who also hold a variety of powers. A young boy with his trusted Pikachu travels the region with different companions and Pokemon in a quest to become a Pokemon master. It's a classic story that we've all heard in bits and pieces. This is no conventional fantasy series, and the newer episodes feel more aimed at kids. But with its depth, world building, and crazy adventures, it could be considered a modernized type of fantasy series. Number 7. Ukami to Koshinryo. If dragons are not your taste, how about a wolf girl? That sounds wrong, but this is the main fantasy feature of the series. Said wolf girl is in fact a wolf deity by the name of Holo. Once she was revered by a small town named Paslo and its people. When the people became self-sufficient, the once wise wolf of Uetsu became a mere folktale. One day, a traveling merchant named Kraft Lawrence arrives in town and ends up acquiring Holo as a business partner. While the fantasy genre takes more of a backseat, this is still an interesting mix of economics and romance. There's also a good depth to enjoy with the characters and their backstories and personalities. Number 8. Maoyu Maoyusha. Now, this is a series that takes on the classic medieval setting involving humans battling against demons. You would expect full-on fantasy battles at first, but this is not the kind of story. For years, humans and demons have battled. When a young hero forges ahead to face the demon ruler, he is shocked to discover the ruler is not only a beautiful queen, but also a queen that seeks his help. When he initially refuses, her points eventually have him seeing a different side of the war. It's a different concept that does feature politics more than you'd think, but it makes for an interesting exploration of different perspectives with a fantasy overtone for the whole thing. Number 10. Tokyo Ghoul. Dark fantasy works are rising fast, and this is definitely the one to start with if you're interested. More than taking a modernized take on fantasy, which is not often done, the series explores a different take to a fantasy creature. In the story, a city has humans and beings known as ghouls coexisting together. It is not just their hunger for human flesh that makes these beings so frightening. No. What makes them frightening is their ability to blend in among humans. An unfortunate thing that bookish college student Ken Kaneki learns is a bit too late. Following an accident with a date, Kaneki wakes up to find that he has been transformed into a part ghoul. Now he must live a secret life as a half ghoul, half human. Based on what we think is worthy, subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss any future updates. If you have more about it, please feel free to share them with us. Share them in the comments below and wait for our interesting topics coming soon. If you think they deserve to be on this list, share your opinion in the comments below.